Well, good morning. I hope it's a good day wherever you are. Most of us would probably prefer not to come face to face with a judge because it could mean we'd be appearing in court. Well, this morning we're going to do just that, and it starts right now.
From TV6, this is The Ryan Report. Now, here's your host, Don Ryan.
Well, in truth, we'll be talking with a former judge, one who actually just stepped away from the bench. Thomas Sulka served as Circuit Court Judge in Marquette County for the past 18 years. He retired as Chief Judge of the 25th Circuit on December 31st. He is our guest this morning. Judge Sulka, welcome to The Ryan Report.
Well, I'm glad to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
As always, I like to give our audience a chance to get to know our guests a little bit before we get into some of the serious business about judicial issues. But
Sure.
You're a UP native?
I was born and raised in Ishpeming, and both my mom and dad were born and raised in National Mine, and
Okay.
one of my grandparents was born in Humboldt. So yes, I go back pretty deep in the Upper Peninsula.
Very much a Western Marquette County person. You know, you went to Northern Michigan University.
Yes.
When you started Northern, did you know that you were going to be pursuing a law degree, or did that come later?
That came later. I graduated from Ishpeming High School in '67 and started at Northern, not really having a specific career objective in mind. But I would say about my junior year, the idea of law school started to gel a little bit.
And you went to law school in Wyoming. How did you happen to choose that?
University of Wyoming in Laramie. Well, it was a two-way process. One, I applied, and secondly, they accepted me. But I was, of course, with Upper Peninsula roots, I never really spent any significant time below the bridge, and I really had no interest in going to live in a large metropolitan area. And of course, at that time, your law schools were pretty much limited to Southeast Michigan. And I'd always been attracted to the West. Laramie was a small town, not unlike Marquette, the Ishpeming, Marquette County area. Wyoming is a very rural state and a very beautiful place. And also, at that time, out-of-state tuition was really quite low for a lot of the Western colleges.
Okay.
So all of that kind of came together.
And it all worked out well.
Worked out well. I really loved Wyoming. Came very close to staying there, but really missed the Great Lakes, the Upper Peninsula, Lake Superior, and that brought me back.
You know, as a judge, you just come into contact with so many different types of cases. And I have to think that your legal career before you became a judge really served that well, because it was pretty varied. In fact, you started working for UP Legal Services, I believe.
Yes. Yeah, out of law school, I took the Michigan bar exam and started with what is now Northern Michigan Legal Services in the Western UP in Gogebic County, out of the Bessemer office. And that was largely dealing with family law, landlord-tenant law. The Legal Services program is kind of a joint funding at that time between the federal, what was then the Legal Services Corporation, part of the old Johnson War on Poverty. Evolved over time. Now it's supported by the State Bar Foundation, a lot of different funding sources. But it continues, and it provides legal assistance to low-income people in certain kinds of cases. So I started there, came then back to my home area in Marquette County, served a period of time as assistant prosecutor with Gary Walker.
You actually jumped to the other side of the courtroom.
I did, and then I had a period of time in private practice in the Negaunee area. And, so that whole background from family law to criminal law to various kinds of litigation, I think did, now looking back on it, serve as a very good foundation.
At what point in that process did you decide maybe you'd like to be a judge?
Well, mid-1980s, there was a seat that opened up in the 96th District Court. We had a very long-serving district court judge, Steve Cattell, who has since passed away. But he was decided to retire, step down, so it was an open seat. And at that time, I had, enjoyed my time in the prosecutor's office. I enjoyed the public aspect of law practice. So that was an open seat, and I ran for the district court. And my opponent was retired Judge Jim Collins.
Okay.
So we had a very spirited campaign, two candidates from the West End, if you will. Judge Collins beat me in that race in '84 by about 210 votes out of 22,000 cast.
Wow, it's close.
And you know, a lot of people think recount, and I went down to the courthouse and talked to then County Clerk Hank Skews, and of course the county clerk is the chief election official in the county, and he said, and he was a very good friend of mine, and he said, well, you know, really it was a close result, but a recount is really not going to change the results. And I relied on his judgment and did not seek any kind of recount. Judge Collins went on to serve a very lengthy and distinguished career in the district court. I often tell people I think I probably won that race by losing it because I had a lot of law practice ahead of me. One interesting anecdote, you know, in that race in '84, I grew up, of course, in Ishpeming, and my mom and dad lived at the time in Deer Lake location, north of the cemetery. And John Volker lived out that way. He was still living, and my folks were going to vote for me at the Ishpeming Township Hall on election day, and they still had their Solka sign in their car. Judge Volker pulled up next to him, also going in to vote, and I don't know if he knew that they were my folks or not, but Judge Volker commented to my mom and dad that candidate Solka is a nice young man, but he's a little too young to be a judge.
That's it.
So I thought that was pretty much my career. I never really thought about judgeship again. I had a good law practice. And then one day in about 1997, I was at my then office in Marquette, and Judge Quinnell called me and indicated he was considering retiring at the end of his term, which was in '98. And he inquired as to whether or not I'd be interested in running for his seat. He gave me a bit of a heads up.
Okay.
And I was very, very humbled by that call, because by that time Judge Quinnell had already established a very long and distinguished career, and he was really widely regarded among the bar as an excellent judge. So that kind of got me back to where we are today.
Okay, we're going to have to take a break. We'll follow up on that when we come back. Back with more with the Judge Solka after we take this break. And we're talking this morning with recently retired Circuit Court Judge Thomas Solka. So you came on the court in 1998?
January 1 of '99.
And at that time, I believe Judge Miklo was serving in the other seat?
Well, Judge Miklo was a '96 district court judge, along with Judge Collins, and the other. We had two circuit court judges, and the other sitting judge was Judge Weber, John Weber, Jack Weber.
Right. At that point, were they? I know eventually you divided into civil law and family law.
Right.
Did that begin immediately?
We started that in 2003. When I came on the bench in '99, the circuit court caseload, which is the serious criminal matters, civil matters, and family matters, are the vast majority of the circuit court caseload. That was just divided between the two sitting judges on a kind of a random draw fashion, but still spread the cases fairly equally. So I could draw a homicide case one day, and the next case could come in. It might be a divorce with children. And that was pretty much how the docket was run. Mid-90s, the legislature passed something called the Family Court Act, and that really indicated a legislative preference that courts establish a dedicated family court docket if there's sufficient resources available. And I started to look at that, and I concluded that we really, with two judges, to meet the legislative intent, we really should be running a full-time family court. So I initiated that. Judge Weber went along with it, agreed, provided I took the first swing, or first tour of duty, if you will, in family court, which I did. So we started that in 2003.
Okay. And I believe I've read where you kind of prefer that area.
Well, it's, I'd like, I loved all of my work, but the family court is one that, it's not why I ran for the judgeship, but once I started doing it, it kind of drew me in more and more. Those cases don't get the headlines They don't shake the universe very much, but they matter greatly to the people and children and families involved. And it is really by volume the majority of the court docket. And it's historically been viewed as the least desirable part of the docket by some of the judiciary. But I just I enjoyed doing it, enjoyed working with people, trying to come to a judgment that would be fair to both mom and dad and what was also best for the children.
I have to ask you a question without naming names.
Yes.
Were there some lawyerly traits in the courtroom that you really liked and some that annoyed you? Not talking about people, just traits.
For sure, and I think if you asked any judge, you'd get the same answer. We have in the Upper Peninsula, in Marquette County in particular, we have a wonderful group of attorneys that appear in court, but there are always some that maybe fall outside of the range of what we like to see. Timeliness, being on time is important. Coming prepared is important. And there are some that, they habitually are running 15 or 10 minutes late, sometimes longer, and sometimes not as prepared as well as they can. And that makes it harder for the judge because you're still, even though the lawyer may have not performed the way you think they should, you have to kind of look beyond that, recognizing they're representing people, and your job ultimately is to do what's fair, just, and right for those parties there in the court.
Have you had to scold some judges or some attorneys either in court or in chambers?
Sometimes we've had some very frank discussions in chambers, but not very often. And I think all judges are very, very reluctant. It would really have to be egregious to do that in court because, again, the attorney's relationship with their client is really an important part of it. And I think if you have some concerns about an attorney's performance or appearance, I think it's better to address that in chambers.
We think of a judge as having great authority in the courtroom, which he does, or he or she does.
Yes.
But they also have someone looking over their shoulder too, don't they? They have
We
higher
do.
Courts. You can't just make up your own rules.
We do. I mean, in terms of the merits of our work, we have the Court of Appeals and another layer over that, ultimately the Michigan Supreme Court. So in terms of whether or not we're correctly applying the law or whether or not we're correctly applying the facts from the record before us is subject to appellate review. We're also monitored very closely in terms of our conduct on and off the bench by a body known as the Judicial Tenure Commission. And that the function of that commission is not to weigh whether or not a judge is correctly ruling on the law or the facts, but whether or not the judge's demeanor on the bench is appropriate and proper, and conduct on the bench, whether the judge is adhering to the standard of judicial code. And if not, we can be brought before the Judicial Tenure Commission to answer for that.
Okay, we have to take one more break.
Okay.
Back with more on the Ryan Report in just 2 minutes. Talking with retired Circuit Court Judge Thomas Solka. Just one other kind of question about being a judge. People watching. People watch television, watch movies. They see the judge in court.
Mm-hmm.
But there's a lot more to being a judge than what happens in the courtroom, isn't there?
Well, there is, and I talk about attorneys coming to court prepared. Well, it's also important when the judge takes the bench to be prepared, and that involves, my day started usually the late afternoon or evening before, early in the morning, is reviewing all of the cases and docket that are on that day, and I go back and reread the case history from day one. Particularly in family court, we have families really in jurisdiction until the children turn age 18 and age out. But it's important to know every time you take the bench what the history of the case is. So a lot of that goes on, and like the attorney preparing, the judge also has to prepare.
Yeah. The Marquette County judge situation is going to change. Your
Right.
position was eliminated.
Right.
And that occurred whenever you retired.
That was part of the legislation that passed a couple of years ago on recommendation report of the State Court Administrator's Office, that when the vacancy occurred in this seat, either by death, retirement, or resignation, and I was told, folks, of those I'd prefer retirement, that the seat would then sunset. And so that's what happened. And it was part of Marquette wasn't picked on in particular. That was part of an overall reduction recommendation for judgeships across the state of Michigan.
So how will we deal with this? How will Marquette County deal with it?
Well, that process is ongoing. Again, having been on the family court end of things when I retired, and I essentially kind of went back there. Judge Mizuki was elected. She served in the family court for about 5 years. But with an eye to that transition, we changed off about 3 years ago. And recognizing that this seat was going to sunset, with the very good support of the Marquette County Board of Commissioners, they saw the need to, and they approved our recommendation to engage and hire a full-time family court referee, and that's Daryl Detman, who's now in that position. And he's doing about 70 to 80% of the hearing docket that I did. And that was very typical for counties of our size around the state, at least from the state court administrators counting. Midland County, Isabella County, Shiawassee, counties of that size pretty much operated with a family court referee. So we have that in place. A lot of my administrative duties as chief judge are being picked up. We had a district court administrator, Charity Mason. Her duties have been expanded to be kind of a Uber or overall director of court operations for circuit, probate, and district, and she's picking up a lot of the administrative work, which I, as chief circuit judge, had to do. And so that's really what's happening, and those components have been in place for about 3 months now, and I think it'll be successful going forward.
We probably don't have time to spell it out, but there are certain cases that must go before a circuit court judge. Right?
Yes, yeah. The referee is very limited. For example, the actual divorce trial has to be heard, and the family court has to be heard by a judge. But everything else pretty much can be done by the referee, but the referee's decision is always subject to review, an appeal by either party to the real judge. So it kind of is another step in the process to finality, which is not really ideal, but that's what we have.
And many of the criminal cases have to go before.
That'll all remain the same, and that all has to be heard by a judge. Yes.
We only have about a minute left. Now, you're not totally retiring, are you?
No, I love the law. It's been a good career for me for 42 years, and I intend to stay active. I am going to, or planning to start a part-time civil mediation practice. I don't see myself going to court to represent people in court, but I would like to bring my experience and skills to try to promote alternative resolutions to very costly trials. And so there is a mediation process. I intend to be a mediator. I've also been asked if I'd be interested in filling in on a temporary basis on a vacancy of a judgeship due to a long-term disability that is over in the eastern UP. And so I might be putting my robe back on yet, even though I took it off.
Okay. Thanks very much for coming in and talking with us this morning, and congratulations on finishing a very distinguished career.
Well, thank you, Don. It's been my pleasure to be here. Thank you.
I'll be back with more in just a couple of minutes. Having a guest on the show today who just retired got me thinking about what happens as we get older. I don't want to put our guest in the old category because by today's standards, he's still a young man. You've probably heard 70 is the new 60 and 60 is the new 50 and so on. In any case, getting older produces a lot of changes in how some of us go about our daily routines. And as many can attest, it can start earlier than you might think. One of the first things a lot of us notice is that we can't read the printed word on a sheet of paper. It starts with a fairly fine print like the telephone book, which doesn't get much use anymore, but eventually it affects everything we try to read. We try to compensate by adjusting, how we hold the paper, but eventually our arms get too short, so we need to look for another answer. The inevitable solution is a pair of glasses or contacts, and once you head down that road, there's no turning back. But as time went on, other things began to happen to me which are a little stranger than the glasses. For example, I find that some fairly basic activities are now accompanied by sounds. Let me explain that. I sit down in the chair and I let out some sort of a sigh. Ah. It happens almost every time. I never used to do that. I stand up and I make a similar sound, but slightly different. It's not like I plan it, it just seems like it's almost necessary to get out of the chair. I know that kids don't do that. It's just something that came with age. I also envy young people when I see them sit down and bounce up off the floor. I used to do that. Now it's an effort. Sometimes if I sit on the floor to do something with kids, I begin to wonder if I'll be able to stand up again without having to bring in a crane to lift me up. I think my bouncing mechanism wore out. There's a lot more, but those are just some of the signs. So in case you're wondering if that age is approaching for you, I did a little research on the internet and found some clues that will let you know that you're definitely getting older. Things like your children begin to look middle-aged. You sit in a rocking chair and can't get it going. You look forward to a dull evening. You know all the answers, but nobody asks you the questions. Your knees buckle and your belt won't. And you have a dream about prunes. The joys of aging. Not always pleasant, but it beats the alternative. I'll be back in 2 minutes. It's about time to wrap it up for another week. The Today Show is standing by and just about ready to roll. Remember, if you want to see the latest news at any time, you can check it out at uppermichigansource.com. You'll also find the Ryan Report at that same internet address. Thanks to Judge Tomasolko for coming in today to share some thoughts about his career and the workings of the court system. And thank you for joining us. I hope we can look forward to seeing you again next Sunday morning.